This morning, however, what I want to share with you is I want to speak to you this morning through a message entitled A 360-Degree Turn. A 360-degree turn. The disciples turned 180 degrees. Jesus was gone. He's left. He was dead. Their hopes, dreams, ideals, careers shattered. And they turned around. They had had enough. It didn't quite work out the way they expected to. They were hoping that it would work out differently. In fact, they had their hopes, their dreams. In fact, they had their lives staked on this idea that Jesus would come and change everything. But now he was gone. And they turned 180 degrees and they went fishing. They went back to what they did before they met him. They went back to what they knew how to do. They went fishing. And John chapter 21 verse 3-5 tells us how Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing at all. The most unsuccessful fishing trip ever. They turned around and went back to what they used to do, and suddenly it didn't work. They caught nothing at all. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. The disciples turned 180 degrees. They turned back, but not even turning back could solve the space of hopelessness where they were at. Maybe this morning you can relate. Maybe you're finding yourself in a space where things didn't quite pan out the way you expected them to. Maybe life hasn't worked out how you have hoped. Maybe your life doesn't quite work the way you wished it would. Maybe you're in a space where life just isn't what you hoped it would be, and you're thinking about turning around. Maybe you have turned around, and not even turning around could fix what you were hoping to fix. See, the thing with fishing is that the fun of fishing isn't in the fact that you always know you're going to catch something. The fun of fishing is in the expectation, right? When you go fishing, if it was a guarantee that every time you would throw the line into the water, you would catch something, it wouldn't be half as much fun. Now, I know if you've ever been on a fishing trip like the disciples where you caught nothing, you would rather have caught something every time. But the fun of fishing lies in the anticipation. It's in the expectation. It's in the not knowing if this could be the time. And maybe this time. And maybe this time. And maybe this time. And just when you're ready to give up, something happens. There's a bite on the line. And that'll keep you going for a couple hundred more, maybe this times. Because maybe this time, the anticipation, the possibility, the excitement of it could just be different. It could just maybe work out. And maybe this time. The disciples had a whole night of maybe this times without any result. I think 512 City Church finds itself at a throwing out of the net another time. This day, on the date 5/12/2019, we're throwing out the net again on another side. We're relocating, we're repositioning ourselves to another spot. And I believe what God wants us to do in this new spot is not turn 180 degrees around. See, because turning 180 degrees, that would get you in another direction. Now, I know we're not all equally mathematically inclined. So I'll tell you a little story just to make sure if you're not confused yet, you'll be confused now. But it's the story about the football coach that was asked to sub for the maths teacher in high school, right? So he realized that he was way out of his depth, but he had to sub. So he decided he had all these football kids there. So he wanted to show them how important mathematics are to their futures. So he decided he'll teach a class, and he stepped to the front of the class, and on the chalkboard, he drew a circle, and he said, "Class, draw a 180-degree circle." And the whole class kind of went quiet, little awkward, looked at him, and one of the brave ones said, "Sir, I'm sure you mean a 360-degree circle." And he said, "No, dummy, it's a small circle, 180 degrees, big circle, 360 degrees. No? Not confused yet? Okay. Well, fact of the matter is that 180 degrees is a turnaround, right? That's going in the opposite direction. But a 360-degree turnaround is turning around from where you started, and once you've turned 360 degrees, you're back to where you started. By the way, whether it's a small or a big circle, it's the same. Okay, awkward silence. Moving on. The fact of the matter is that I believe this is exactly what God wants us to do. Is He wants us to not turn 180 degrees around, but as we throwing out the net in this new space, what God wants us to do is He wants to turn us 360 degrees around. And you might ask, what's the fun in that? What's the need in turning 360 degrees around? Well, here's the thing. Is I believe that as we turn around, the vision stays the same, the plan stays the same, the direction stays the same, but there's a moment, there's an opportunity today for us to pause, to stop, to turn around, to become aware again of where God has placed us, of who God has placed us between, and to keep moving in the same direction. I believe that is true for 512 City Church, but I also believe that that is true for individuals here this morning. That you've come to a place where things didn't quite work out the way you thought it would, where life maybe hasn't quite worked out the way you expected it to. You've been moving in a direction, but that direction hasn't had all the results that you hoped that direction would have. And maybe today is a moment where you could pause again, where you could stop again and just turn around and see afresh again what is around you. Because sometimes we lose perspective. We lose the vision that God has given us. We lose the aim that God has set out for us. We stop seeing people around us as we should. See, 512 City Church exists so that people would be telling stories of Jesus changing lives through them. That's why we are here. And that vision isn't changing just because we've changed venues. We exist to see people tell stories of how God has used them to mobilize people, to set people up, to encourage people so that the city of Austin might be reached through us. So that this city and every corner of the city might be reached. You've heard me speak about the donuts in the city of Austin. If you look at church activity, I know it's dangerous to speak about donuts. I've lost some of you. You're gone. You've got jelly donuts, and you've got all kinds of donuts, fresh donuts. You'll settle for a stale donut right now. I know. We're getting close to lunch. But the fact of the matter is, that the city of Austin is this donut where all the Christian activity is happening around the edges, but in the middle there's this hole, there's this lack of church engagement. The city of Austin is almost 40% Christian if you look at the whole of it, but then you go to the center of the city and you're looking at about 4% Christian in the center of the city. And 512 City Church is here to mobilize people not only from the center of the city, but from all over the city. But part of our vision, part of our purpose, part of our reason for being is to make sure that we fill up the hole in the center of the donut. And I know that this vision to reach the city is one that's going to cost all of us a lot. It doesn't just happen by itself. But it's moments like these when we get to these dates like 5/12 of 2019 where we move into a new venue, where we get to pause and stop and just turn around again and see what's around us. I think that moment when the disciples turned 180 degrees around on the Sea of Galilee that day, it was because Jesus wanted them to understand. The reason why they didn't catch any fish that day was because Jesus wanted them to understand that it was good for them to stop. But He wanted to show them back to their vision, back to their roots, back to their focus, back to His calling over them. But sometimes we struggle to see. We struggle to see our city for who it is. We struggle to see our lives for who it is. We struggle to see our neighbors for who they are. We struggle to see our colleagues for who they are. We get so busy with surviving life that we stop seeing what God would have us see. And may we see once again. It was this same Sea of Galilee. A couple of months before that, Jesus was on a boat with his disciples. And to give you a bit of context about what happened on the Sea of Galilee is that Jesus was traveling with his disciples back across the Sea of Galilee. But a couple of things happened before this moment, which we're about to read in Mark chapter 8. But what happened before is, first, Jesus was on the Judean side of the Sea of Galilee. And on the Judean side of the Sea of Galilee, he fed the 5,000. You guys have heard the story of how Jesus took the 5 loaves and he fed 5,000 men plus women plus children, and he fed them, and there was this great commotion, and then they go across to the other side, and when they get to the other side, there's a couple of miracles that take place there. But after these miracles have taken place, again a crowd is gathered, again they're hungry, and this time he takes 7 loaves, and with these 7 loaves he feeds the 4,000 people on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. Now, those 2 major things happened, plus a couple others. Now they're back on the same sea, heading back on a boat. But what has happened is the disciples forgot to bring any bread onto the boat. So they're on the boat, they're hungry, and while they're all sitting there being hungry, thinking about bread, they're working through this thing, and Jesus is addressing something to them. He's speaking about the leaven of the Pharisees, how bad the Pharisees are, and how they're messing up their lives, and they shouldn't be listening to the Pharisees, and the disciples miss the plot completely. They start thinking amongst themselves, you see, he's addressing us because we didn't bring bread. We're hungry, and the reason he's talking about the leaven of the Pharisees is because we didn't bring bread. But then Jesus becomes aware of that, and in Mark chapter 8, verse 17, this is what it says. But Jesus, being aware of it, said to them, "Why do you reason because you have no bread? Do you not yet perceive nor understand? Is your heart still hardened? Having eyes, do you not see? And having ears, do you not hear? And do you not remember?" So Jesus is addressing them, and he says, guys, you're missing the point here. You're missing the plan, you're missing the vision, you're missing the idea. You're not seeing things for what they are. Having eyes, do you not see? Verse 19. When I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many baskets full of fragments did you take up? They said to him, 12. Also, when I break the 7 for the 4,000, how many large baskets full of fragments did you take up? And they said to him, 7. So he said to them, how is it you do not understand? Now, I'm sure if you are at all good at maths, you've figured it out now and it makes a lot of sense to you, right? No? Okay, well, I put this into an equation for you, okay? So let's try this equation, okay? L would be for loaves, so 5L multiplied by capital J, right? You can think who capital J is, right? Okay? So 5L multiplied by capital J minus 5,000 men equals 12 baskets, okay? Have you got the equation? Okay, now the equal equation that Jesus brings is he says, okay, 7L, 7 loaves, multiplied by Jesus, minus 4,000 equals 7 baskets, okay? And now I'm sure it makes sense, now that you see it like that, right? No, it doesn't. It doesn't make any sense. And Jesus asked the disciples, he says, so guys, now do you see it? And I can imagine they went, no. What do you mean? What's the point? I mean, he just accused them of seeing you don't see and hearing you don't hear. And you'll see how this whole chapter 8 of the book of Mark is all about the disciples not seeing what's going on around them. They're missing the plot. And I know you just want to know, how does this make sense? Well, it's simple. See, when Jesus multiplied the 5 loaves for the 5,000, he did it on the Judean side, on the Israeli side of the Sea of Galilee. on the Israeli side of the Sea of Galilee, there were 12 tribes of Israel that lived there. And when they crossed the sea, and on the other side, he took 7 loaves and he multiplied it and he fed 4,000 people. It was in a place called Diapolis. And in that region, in that space, do you know how many heathen nations lived there? 7. So what Jesus was saying, it wasn't about the loaves. It had nothing to do with the amount of people. All that it was about the people that were living in those spaces. And it doesn't matter how many they were. When we were done and they all ate, there was enough for the 12 tribes of Israel on the one side and the 7 heathen nations on the other side, because I'm all about them. I'm all about the people around you. It's not about the bread that you're worried about eating right now. It's not about your hungry tummies or the fact that you forgot to bring bread to the boat. It's all about the 12 nations on that side of the sea, and the 12 tribes on that side of the sea, and the 7 nations on that side of the sea. That is what this is all about. That is who I came for. And his desire is for us to see. And on this day, as we're making a 360-degree turn as 512 City Church, we're saying, God, we want to see again the people of the city. We want to see again the people that you came and lived and died for. We want to be taken up by the lostness of our city. We want to be aware of the people that are around us. We don't want to be so taken up by our own hungry tummies that we miss the point. We don't want to be so taken up in trying to understand what you say that we forget that it's all about the people that are around us. Chapter 8 continues along this theme of seeing and not seeing. He says, having eyes, do you not see? That's what Jesus was speaking about. And then they arrive in Bethsaida. And when they arrive in Bethsaida, what happens in Bethsaida in verse 22, it says, then they came to Bethsaida and they brought a blind man to him and begged him to touch him. So he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands on him, he asked him if he saw anything. And he looked up and said, I see men like trees walking. The New Living Translation takes this verse and says, he looked around and said, yes, I see people, but I can't see them very clearly. They look like trees walking around. This is a strange incident. It's the only time that Jesus healed someone that they weren't completely healed. It's the only time that Jesus prayed for someone and they weren't 100% all right when he was done praying for them. It's the only time that Jesus comes and he approaches somebody and the job isn't done immediately. And initially when you read this, there's a part of you that kind of goes, this is strange. But I'm sure that as John Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark, he was reminiscing on the day when they didn't see, when they didn't hear, when they didn't understand, when they looked around and people were walking around like trees. Because in the context of this chapter, it makes perfect sense that Jesus would make a point. Could Jesus completely heal the guy? I know he could have. He did it so many times before. But in this one instance, he comes and he says, I see men walking around like trees. I see others going about their business, not like people, but like things. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I'm living my life, I have the same problem this blind man initially had. I see people, but I don't quite see them. And I think sometimes we can get so taken up with life that we see people without seeing them, without noticing them, without understanding that we are here for them, without seeing them the way God sees them, the way He wants us to see them. Sometimes in life it's hard to see right. The hardest thing to see is others. There's nothing harder in this life than seeing life from another's perspective. There's nothing harder in this life than truly seeing other people. Of all the things we see, the hardest thing to see are other people. The story continues, thankfully, for the blind man. Jesus prayed, and he prayed again in verse 25. Then he put his hands on his eyes again and made him look up. And he was restored and saw everyone clearly. It's very interesting if you look at the original Greek language here around everyone clearly. The two words here, everyone and clearly, are the words hapas and teliego. And hapas teliego is everyone clearly. Now hapas or everyone, if you look at the original Greek, you'll never believe it, but the word actually means everyone. I know that was deep. But it means everyone. And it's significant that it means everyone because it means everyone. Everyone clearly. Teliegos. Teliegos, the second word here is a little more complicated. The word teliegos is typically translated as clearly or in a shining manner or plainly. But if you dig deeper into this word, you'll find that it's the combination of two Greek words meshed together into this one. The first one is telos. Now, telos is the word where we get our word telescope from, right? So a telescope is something that makes a focus. It's a point of aim, right? So it's telos. And then the second word that comes together, it's telos and agi. So teliegos is teliagi, and agi is a beam of light, or it's the bright shining of the dawn. So essentially, what's being said here is it says it's the focused beam of light shining on somebody. So the teliegos, the Greek word being used here, when he said he saw everyone, every single one clearly, it means he saw everyone as if a ray of heaven, a ray of light just opened up over them. You know, like that moment when you saw the one for the first time, when you met your husband and your wife and time stood still and you heard angels singing and a beam of light coming from heaven and you heard, oh. You remember the moment, right? What this word is saying is it says you see every person as if through a telescope and a ray of light upon their heads. What this says is when Jesus prayed for this man again, he could see everyone clearly. Every person in his life, he saw the focused attention and love of God upon that person. See, because when Jesus opens our eyes to see our community, we can never see people the same way. We can no longer see people as things, but we see every person as the targeted focus of the love of God. And that is my prayer for us. My prayer for us is that we would see once again and that we would see everyone clearly. Every neighbor, every colleague, every friend, every student, every person living in the city, may we see them clearly once again. May we see them as those who have the focused attention and light and love of God upon their lives. Through history, there's been a couple of guys that has seen clearly. One of my favorites is a guy named Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And the reason why I love him is because he's a guy that said this. He said, the church is the church only when it exists for others. It must tell men of every calling what it means to live for Christ, to exist for others. The church is only the church when it exists for others. Now, the problem is, we could read this quote, and the quote makes sense within the context of the message, right? So, that we exist for the people around us. We should see the people around us. We should be aware of the people around us, that we as a church exist for the people around us. But this quote is watered down if you don't understand who it is that is saying this. Have you noticed that God speaks through the who as much as he does through the what? So Dietrich Bonhoeffer, if you don't know his story, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is born at the turn of the 20th century in 1906. And his father is a neurologist in Germany, and his mother is the daughter of a countess. So he's born into royalty. He's actually born into a very wealthy, very influential family, but he's born into the same time and age as Nazi Germany is becoming Nazi Germany. And Dietrich Bonhoeffer will be about just a little under 30 years old. He'd be 27 years old when the Nazi party would come into, and Adolf Hitler will start reigning, and the Third Reich would start in Germany, and this would be his story. But throughout his young life, when he was 14 years old, Dietrich Bonhoeffer decided that he wanted to become a pastor. He actually writes his older brother, a letter about this, and his brother can't believe that his younger brother wants to become a pastor. In fact, his whole family tries and talks Dietrich Bonhoeffer out of this idea of becoming a father. His brother's letter to him to talk him out of this is available to us. He writes to his brother, he says, "How could you want to be a part of such a poor, feeble, boring, petty, Borgias institution as the church?" That's quite hectic. He writes his brother back. He says, "If it is as you say, I will reform it." Dietrich goes ahead. He becomes a pastor. He becomes a preacher. He becomes a theologian in Nazi Germany. And throughout his life, Dietrich's idea of living for others would never be a cheap one. In fact, it would cost him around every turn. It would cost him to the extent that he's eventually imprisoned in Nazi Germany for his belief that all men are equal before God. His idea of seeing every type of person, whether Jew or German or from whatever nationality, that Jesus Christ came and died for all of them. Him living his life for the sake of those would land him in jail, and eventually would land him in the concentration camp along with the Jews. 1944, within the last couple of weeks before the liberation of that particular concentration camp from Nazi Germany, he would be hung for his beliefs. The church is only church when it exists for others. Was not a cheap statement for Dietrich Bonhoeffer. And I'm challenged by his life and his story about how cheap I sometimes make that statement in my own life. How quickly my life just becomes about whether or not I've got bread and things and am comfortable. How often I forget about the 12 tribes on the one side and the 7 heathen nations on the other side, and my whole life is just about whether or not I'm satisfied right now. I'm challenged about the times that I turned 180 degrees on good intentions and good ideas and good principles. How often I've seen men like trees, and I haven't seen them clearly as he sees them. And I'm challenged. I'm challenged by John chapter 21, where the disciples find themselves in this place where they have fished all night. They have tried all night, and they've thrown out the net, and every time the net has come back empty. And then Jesus stands screaming to them from the shore, and he says, "Have you caught anything?" And their response is no. But then verse 6 says, then he said, throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some. So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there was so many fish in it. And I'm saying, God, thank you that we get to one more time, one more week, one more moment be that net that you throw out in this city, be that net that you can cast out in the city of Austin as we as a church are becoming His net, His outreach to the city. That is what this church is. We are that net, each of us woven together, knitted together, brought together into the fabric of this net. And in this moment, as we're moved to another venue, I feel like God is saying, let's throw out this net another time. Let's be that net. But I want to tell you that the church isn't a building. The church isn't an organization. The church isn't the leaders of the church. The church is the net, and the net is made up of each and every one of us. If God is telling us to throw out our net on another side, that means that He wants each and every one of us to see again the city for who they are. He wants each and every one of us to be a part of this, His church, His body, His plan. And I want to get real practical for a moment this morning. And I want to say that's what we are. We are His net that He's throwing out. But I don't want to just philosophize about this. I want us to speak for a moment about what does that mean. And I believe it means three things. It costs us three things. It costs us our time. It costs us volunteering, giving our time, giving of ourselves, giving moments of our time. It costs us saying, God, I'm going to give you every moment of every day of my life. I'm going to be aware of the people in my life. I'm going to do everything I do in life as if I'm doing it for you. But it also costs us our treasure. It costs us money. It costs us some of our finances as a church. If we are the church, then it takes money to cast out the net. It takes money to do this, to be here, to be downtown. It costs us some of our treasure. And I am deeply grateful for the 33 household units that are contributing on a monthly basis to 512 City Church. And I'm deeply grateful for every one of you. But we're 70% there. We're 30%, that 33 families are getting us only 70% to sustainability as a church. And right now, as 512 City Church, we're walking on the water and we're going to keep on casting out this net. But I want to tell you, unless God makes up the other 30%, 512 City Church will not exist. It takes of our treasure. And it takes of our talents. God has given each and every one of us the ability to do certain things well. To serve, to be a part of, to do something. My challenge to you this morning is simply this. How has God called your time, your treasure, and your talents to be a part of what He wants to do in this city? How has He woven you into this net as we see the city again? As we come to this point of moving in a direction, stopping for a moment, turning 360 degrees around, making sure we see where God has placed us, focusing back on the vision that He has given us. What does that mean in your life? What is it that He wants you to see again? Lord, as a church, we want to come. And Lord, I want to come and dedicate this space this morning. Lord, you have you've placed us as a church in this place, on this corner of the city, Lord. You've put us here in the northwest corner of downtown Austin, God, and you've put us here for a reason and for a purpose and for a time such as this. And God, I want to dedicate this space that you have given us to gather as a church, Lord. But God, as we make a turnaround this morning, God, I want to just be aware again of the community, of the people, of the individuals that you love, Lord God. If there was 12 tribes on the one side of the Sea of Galilee and 70 heathen nations on the other side of the Sea of Galilee, Lord, I'm wondering how many tribes, how many people, how many groups, how many households, how many individuals are there in this city. Lord, and I want to declare that just as you took 5 loaves and you fed 5,000, and you took 7 loaves and you fed 4,000, God, I want to declare that if we bring our loaves, if we bring our time, if we bring our treasure, and if we bring our talents, God, I know that it's enough for you to feed the city, God. But God, I know that you choose to use people. You choose to use individuals in this process. And I want to challenge you this morning. If you're ready to say, God, use me. Lord, I want to be a part of the net that you're casting out on the other side. And maybe you've done this 100 times before, and you just want to make it firm again. And maybe you've never done this before, but if you're ready to say, God, use my time, use my treasure, use my talents, use all of my life, I want to be woven into this net that you cast again. Can I ask you, just between you and God, if you want to make that commitment, if you want to say this morning that, Lord, here am I, use me. Lord, here am I, heal me from my blindness of not seeing the people around me. Lord, here am I, break my life like you broke that bread and hand it out to people around you. God, here am I, use me like you used Dietrich Bonhoeffer in that terrible time in Germany, God. Use me in this time, in this season, in this city, God. Here am I, take my life and reach the nations and the tribes of the city through it. If you want to respond to God this morning and make that declaration, can I ask you to just stand up right there where you are? You're not standing for me, you're not standing for someone else. This is a commitment between you and God as you're saying, God, use me. Take my life. Take my time. Take my treasure. Take my talents.
As we'll stand